Well, good afternoon. Welcome to our Advanced Scenarios course here. This course is geared towards folks that have been using ForeFlight for a little while. We're going to look at a scenario that you might fly in the airplane and the tools and tricks that ForeFlight has to offer to make that a little bit easier for you. My job here today is to build that toolkit of things you know how to do in ForeFlight so that you can be more proficient as you go and plan your flights so you spend less time on the ground, more time up in the air, enjoying aviation with us. Who flew into Oshkosh this year? Pretty good, pretty good. Who built what they flew in this year? Got one or two? Not bad. Well, all right. My name is Thomas Daugherty. I'm one of the product managers here at ForeFlight. I focus primarily on the logging products, so the logbook and the track log there, but be more than happy to talk to you about anything inside of ForeFlight. One of the best things about being a customer at ForeFlight is your access to our pilot support team. You can get a hold of them by going to team@foreflight.com. They are all pilots and they're all ForeFlight experts. What that means is if you have an issue and you want to learn how to do something inside of ForeFlight, you don't need to say, hey, how do I use XYZ feature properly? Tell them what you want to do in the airplane. They've all been there. They're all experienced to say, oh yeah, you need to pull up that plate faster when you're on an approach. Here's a couple of ways you can do that. It'll be much easier for you. So they really are your best resource. With all that out of the way, let's go ahead and hop right into the meat of the presentation here for our advanced scenarios. Well, I was thinking of something that might be a little tricky, it might be a little complicated as we're going in, and I thought, well, why don't we just go ahead and fly into AirVenture this year? So I've got my last leg of the trip coming up from Austin where we're at, and I've stopped in DeKalb, and I'm planning the last leg and my arrival into Oshkosh. How did I pick DeKalb as my stop on this? I used the 100 low lead layer that I have on the map to look at my fuel prices and see what the cheapest fuel was along that route. So I could go ahead and stop there and see, yep, I've got a good deal on fuel. I can see notes and updates about that FBO on the side over there. I can see that they're giving out free hot dogs and cookies to people flying up to AirVenture, and well, that sounds like a pretty good deal on our fuel stop. I want to point out one little thing over here. Fuel prices have been changing pretty quick at FBOs these days. There's actually an update fuel button in the lower right-hand corner when looking at the FBO, and you can submit new fuel prices. So if you get somewhere, go ahead and submit a fuel price, even if it's the same price in there, because that will feed in to this little piece right here that lets other customers know when fuel was last updated. So you can look at this and say, oh, it was updated a day ago. That was probably a pretty good price. Or it was updated 3 weeks ago. I probably ought to go ahead and call that FBO and verify that that is in fact still the price before I go and land. So I've got my fuel stop there, and I've got a nice direct to route into Oshkosh. Any chance ATC is going to let me do that direct to on the way up here? Probably not this week. Luckily, ForeFlight's got a tab down here called Documents, where we have a whole collection of things provided to you as customers as part of your subscription. There are all of the FAA handbooks, the pilot flying guide, the instrument handbook, provided to you as part of your subscription right here inside of the Documents catalog. Excellent resource. And under the ForeFlight drive, we actually publish the Oshkosh NOTAM every year. So you have that right there on your EFB for you to use as you're planning and flying in. I simply tap on the document that I want. I can scroll through all the pages along the bottom, but I can get to exactly what I'm looking for a little bit faster by tapping that little hourglass icon in the upper right-hand corner. That allows me to do keyword searches, to browse bookmarks of pages that I'm interested in, and even use the table of contents here to get to the correct page. So if I'm trying to find out a piece of information quickly, very easy to move around those documents. So no problem for me to go ahead and find the information on the Fisk arrival into Oshkosh as part of the NOTAM. I can read through this and understand exactly where I'm supposed to be and who I'm supposed to talk to. And I want to start building up a situational awareness picture of what this flight's going to look like before I go fly it. So I want to start doing everything I can to get this route into my iPad and understanding what it's going to look like while my eyes are outside the airplane, following traffic and looking for landmarks. So let's start to get that stuff plugged into our route box. On the very bottom down here, I've got a nice list of waypoints. And the FAA has been kind enough to us to go ahead and put 5-letter computer nav waypoints for each of the points along the arrival. Well, that makes it quite easy for me. I can go back to the maps page, open up the flight plan drawer, and tap in each of those waypoints. It looks like I've got a pretty good start along the arrival, but I noticed one thing in there. I'm not supposed to fly over part of the lake here. In fact, they'll probably get a little mad at me if I corner cut too much, as they're using that for holds. I want to make sure that I keep the lake off to the left-hand side of the aircraft. I'm going to use a tool inside of ForeFlight called Rubberbanding to add a dog leg to this route. So I'm going to take my finger and I'm going to press and hold onto that route leg, and I'm going to drag that south of the lake here and release, and then just select the lat long. Once I have that all in there, now I've got a nice leg that's going to keep me away from the lake, keep that on the left side of the airplane, and I've not needed to reconfigure any of my route. As we look at the last little bit here from Ripon into Fisk, I can see that I'm supposed to follow the railroad tracks in, and I've got a couple of landmarks like the small town of Pickett along the route there that I want to keep an eye out for. So how do I know where those railroad tracks go, and how do I look up points of interest like a small town along this route? Well, I'll go ahead and put in the code for Fisk so that I've got my initial leg there. And then along the left-hand side of the maps page, I've got these quick selectors over here, as long as I've got the aeronautical layer up. And one of those along the very bottom looks like a little I-35 sign. If anybody here is from Central Texas, we have a bit of a love-hate relationship with I-35, so that's why we have that logo in there. I can tap on that, and now I can see that there are roads and railroads and town labels all along the route here. So I can now see exactly where that railroad goes and what I'm going to need to do to follow that. But what about that town of Pickett? Well, in the upper right-hand corner, I can go ahead and tap on the search box, and I can search for all sorts of things. In fact, in ForeFlight, we call this the universal search, because I can even search for approach plates or arrival procedures in and out of an airport. But you can see some of the things that I've been searching for here. I can even look up points of interest or things like lakes along the route. So maybe I'm flying in and ATC wants me to hold around one of the lakes. It's pretty easy for me to go ahead and understand where that lake is. So let's use that tool to go ahead and type in Pickett, and we can see right down here in our places, we see Pickett, Wisconsin. I can tap on that, and it will show it to me on my map. So now I can see exactly where that town is. And over in the upper corner over here in that box, I can see the Add to Route button. Tapping on that will give me a new waypoint in my route for that town. But I've gone and messed up my flight plan here. I've added Pickett to the very end of my flight, and that's not where I want it. Instead of deleting anything, I'm just going to reorder the route bubbles inside of my flight plan here. So I'm going to press and hold on the little route bubble for Pickett, and I'm going to drag that over into the correct location and then release, and now I've reordered the waypoints in my flight here. Without having to delete anything, I can go through and have that in the order that I need it to be. If I want to delete a waypoint along my flight, I can also press and hold into that route bubble and drag it out of the flight plan drawer, and a little cloud will appear on it, and I can then just delete that waypoint. So it's a quick and easy way to edit my route without having to clear everything. There's another way that I can find out where things like towns or lakes are along my flight, and that's by using something called place labels on the aeronautical map. In the maps page, we've got a little gear icon along the very top up there, and we call this the map settings drawer. Tons of great stuff in there. I highly recommend going through, turning some stuff on, playing around with some of the stuff that's in this drawer. We'll look at a couple of them later, but the one we're interested in right now is called place labels. Turning that on will now show me things like town names and city names all over the aeronautical map. So if I'm trying to reference something with ATC or with other pilots, it's easier for me to find out where those points are along my flight. Tons of great different things in that place labels, things from, I think we've even got like stadiums in there to mountain passes and all sorts of interesting things along the map. Having that aeronautical map up means that we also have our airport diagrams built directly into the map. So without having to pull up an airport diagram, I can simply zoom in on the aeronautical map and see all of my runways, taxiways, and even FBOs on the field. This is the way that I normally get around on taxiways. And by having my terrain, my roads and highways here, and the airport diagram together, it's a lot easier for me to finish off the last bit of the NOTAM route there and understand that either am I going to follow the railroad up to the north side of the airport, or am I going to follow Fisk Ave over down to the south? I can put both of these in there and understand exactly where they are, but I may not know which one I'm going to get until I'm actually in the airplane flying the approach. Well, I don't want to be trying to move stuff around and set this up while I'm in the airplane and trying to follow along. So I'm going to use a feature called Favorites, and that's that little star icon right down there in the flight plan drawer, and that'll allow me to save this route with whatever name I want on it. So I can go through and name it whatever makes sense to me, and then access it by hitting the little star and clock icon along the top up there. When I tap on that, I can see that I've got my Fisk Ave and my Follow Railroads routes ready to go. So when we're in the airplane, as we're flying along, and I understand which side of the airport I'm going to be headed to, I can switch back and forth real quick and not have to reconfigure any of my waypoints. Well, that's gotten us pretty close down to the railroad here, or down to the runway here. If I look through the NOTAM, I can see something that's a little unique to the air show, and that is having to hit a dot on the runway. I want to know what dot I'm going to hit, and I want to know how much runway is remaining from that point. Well, every year, we take our ForeFlight airport diagram for Whitman Field here in Oshkosh, and we make a special version of it with all of the information about the air show. So there's so much cool info in here, from like where Hangar C in our booth is, to where the pavilions are, to things like Warbirds and the North 40 info in there. Use this. This is how we like to get around when we're on the field, is actually use this to understand what sections are where and what we need to go to. Because these are all geo-referenced on that Pro Plus and above plan. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to send it to the map so I can have that ready to go and understand what dots are where. I'm going to tap on Oshkosh Whitman there, the airport icon. It's going to bring out the drawer from the right-hand side for the airport. I like having this up anytime that I'm going into an airport environment, because it allows me to easily access things like frequencies or runway information for an airport while I still have my moving map up flying along. So instead of having to make sure that I've got every frequency imaginable written down on my kneeboard, I can very easily have this ready to go for all of the frequencies and all of the info about the airport. Right here in the middle, I can move from info over to procedures, and we start off on the airport side. And then next to the ForeFlight diagram, I get a little map button there. It says send to map. That little square with an up arrow inside of ForeFlight means send to. That's also a good one to go ahead and play around with. It means that you can take information that you're looking at right now inside of ForeFlight and view it a different way somewhere else in the application. So if you ever see that in a particular area, go ahead and tap on it and understand what those options are. Well, I'll go ahead and hit the Send To map button there. And now I've taken that ForeFlight airport diagram and moved it over onto the map. And in that diagram, I have all of my runway dots and the remaining runway length available for me right there to go. So as I'm setting up for my approach, I don't always have to remember, okay, is my purple on the left side or is my green on the right side in there? I can be looking out at the airplane, spotting my arrival, and then have that as reference ready to go. And that's going to make it a lot easier for me to set myself up on a nice stabilized approach and understand where that's going to take me and understand what maneuvering I'm going to need to do as I approach the runway. Well, all right. I think we've got a pretty good route coming in here. I mentioned that we're trying to build up that situational awareness before we get out to the airplane. Who thinks it's going to be a great idea to be heads down and looking at this route as you're flying along the Fisk arrival in here? No hands? All right. We want to have this as reference and know that route ahead of time. So one of the things that we can do is we can bring up a layer called internet traffic. This allows us to bring traffic from FlightAware, airplanes that are flying in, and view that on our map as long as we've got an internet connection. So when we're on the ground, pre-flighting here, and I can see all of the aircraft that are flying in along the route here. Well, I think we got all our waypoints pretty well in alignment here, as all of our conga line is flying right up the route there. It was a little busy here on Sunday morning. There's a couple of turns around the lake for some folks. This is an excellent way to see what that pattern's going to look like. So if you get that same call, you understand what those holds around the lakes are going to look like. I can also view all of the airspace, terrain, and obstacles along my route using a feature called Profile View. So in the lower right-hand corner of the flight plan drawer, I can tap on that and I can see exactly where all of the airspace, terrain, and route are going to take me along this flight. Well, we have a new tool that can make this a little bit more helpful, because I'm not going to fly 5,500 along this entire route. I'm going to need to follow the arrival down at the very end here to make sure that I'm at the right altitude and right speed. So what I'm going to do is tap on one of the waypoint boxes down here along the bottom for the start of the arrival. And when I do that, I get a little drawer that pops up that says altitude, speed, time. This is a new feature inside of ForeFlight that we call per leg altitudes. I can go through and add different information in here, like I want to start at a particular altitude or cross at a particular altitude. I can look at speed if I have to make a speed change there, and that will come into account in my flight planning. And I can even put in a delay and stay. If you're a flight instructor who does a good bit of time out in practice areas, that's a very handy tool to come take a look at. See us over in Hangar C. So I can go ahead and put in 1,800 feet and 90 knots as per the NOTAM. And when I do that, now my profile view has adjusted to show me that altitude and use that speed as a calculation for my performance profile. And I even see that on the map right at that waypoint. So even if trying to get into the line of traffic completely rots my brain out, I can still remember exactly what altitude and speed I need to be there because I have it written down on the chart. This is going to allow us to, per leg altitude is going to allow us to build a much more complicated flight plan here, where I can avoid all of my airspace and my terrain at whatever altitude I need to be at. And I can take it one step further. On our performance plans, if you tap the layer selector in the bottom left-hand corner of that drawer, you'll see that we have layers for icing, turbulence, and clouds. So I can actually look at the turbulence or icing forecasts along my route and then plan my altitudes around those. So if there's a layer of icing that I want to avoid, maybe I don't want to climb through it, I want to stay low for a while until I'm on the other side, I can use these in combination to make sure that I stay exactly where I need to be. I mentioned not having to remember everything on the map here and having those altitudes and speeds written for us. I can take that a step further with our map annotations tool. That's that little pencil icon on the left-hand side. And one thing that I like to do with this is write frequencies for ATC on the map where I'm going to need them. So these stay geo-referenced into their location. So if I write them next to a waypoint, I can still pan and zoom around and they'll stay next to that waypoint in there. Which means as my aircraft comes flying up from the south here, I'm going to fly right by 125.9. That's going to click off a little light bulb for me and tell me that I probably need to be talking to somebody on that frequency. So I can write these at different places that make sense for me. All right. Now, I read the NOTAM pretty thoroughly, and we don't have to necessarily use all of these waypoints, only if we have a lot of traffic. Well, I might be the luckiest guy flying into Oshkosh here and not have to go all the way out before I continue in. So what do I do if I get into the aircraft and ATC gives me a corner cut to another waypoint? Well, one of the things that I like to use while I'm actually in the air is in the flight plan drawer, the navlog option. And this gives me a ton of great info as far as my per leg remaining time, fuel, distance, and it will update as I fly along based on my ground speed. Well, I've got each leg split up from waypoint to arrow to waypoint. Well, if I just find the arrow that points to the waypoint that ATC wants to clear me towards, so if they clear me to Puckaway Lake here, I can tap on that arrow, and ForeFlight will give me a dialog box that allows me to either activate the leg or fly direct to that waypoint. So we want to hit direct to, and ForeFlight will clear out everything before that point, give me a direct to line from my current position to it, and keep the entire rest of my flight plan. So it's a handy way to get a corner cut around a SID or a star, or in this case, if I get lucky and I don't have to fly the whole procedure. Continuing with our build out of that situational awareness before we get in the airplane, right here in the NOTAM, they've done a nice job of giving me some landmarks along this flight that I can keep an eye out for as I'm flying in. So I've got a water tower and some grain elevators, and then I can see what Fisk Ave looks like on here. It's really handy to have that, but it's not necessarily the best picture of what those things look like. I want to make sure I know where those are and have a little bit more sense of what I'm going to look for. So I'm going to go onto the maps page, and I'm going to activate the aerial map, a couple down from the top there. And that's going to give me satellite imagery of the area around my flight. If you're a flight instructor and you're bringing a student into an unfamiliar field and you're trying to get them to understand where the downwind leg is supposed to be from that airport, this is really handy to go in and say, this road, this house, that's your half mile, that's where you need to be aiming for. Makes it a lot easier from a new sight picture for them. So we'll zoom in on the town of Ripon here, and that sure looks like a new set of elevators, and I can see the water tower up there. So I'm going to press and hold over the water tower and get the search box. This is really similar to what we looked at when we looked at the town of Pickett earlier. But instead of tapping on like the waypoint to save it, I'm going to tap on the More button. So I've got my waypoint there, and then I've got the More button. There we go. And that's going to allow me to save a user waypoint at that location. So instead of having the lat long, I can give it a new name like water tower. And when I save that, I now have a little flag on the map right at that location telling me what that is. User waypoints are really powerful inside of ForeFlight because I can treat them just like a regular waypoint. So if I go ahead and type in water tower into my route, it'll route me to that location. A cool thing that you can do, and a great demo over at the booth, is if you combine these user waypoints and our taxi route advisor tool, you can do some pretty cool things on getting you from your landing to your home, to your hangar at your home airfield. So this will let me go through and understand exactly when and where I'm going to be looking for that water tower along the route. And if that wasn't enough for me to go through and see all the aerial and see everything, how that was going to line up on my flight, on those Performance Plus plans, I can also tap on the little globe with an airplane icon down there in the bottom of my flight plan drawer. And when I do that, I get a 3D preview of my entire route with my route altitudes, my terrain, my airspace, or my aerial view. I can see all the lakes, and I can see the altitudes that I need to be flying at any of these waypoints. I can really build up a preview of what this is going to look like before I get out to the airplane so that I can focus on flying and enjoying a pretty fun arrival here instead of worrying about whether or not I'm on course. So I'm feeling pretty good about what the route's going to look like, but I don't know how long it's going to take me to get there. I go to look at the data on the bottom of the flight plan drawer, and I see that I've got a whole bunch of blanks. Well, one of the reasons is I don't have an estimated time of departure entered in for this route. I can tap on that, and I can set whenever I'm going to depart for the airport or depart from my flight, but I don't yet know when a good time to depart for this flight is. So how do I figure out when we should leave and get on to the arrival? Well, weather's going to be one of the primary things that's going to cause us to want to leave earlier or later. And we've got great weather layers available, like our clouds forecast here, or our winds and temps layer here, that'll allow me to look at things like winds or clouds at different altitudes, predict my forecast, understand when the best time for me to leave to take advantage of the best tailwind is. So I'm getting a little bit more there. I can also tap on my airport route bubble and get a whole series of options here, another great one to play around with, and tap on the Show on Map, pull out that route drawer like we looked at earlier, and instead of going to Info or Procedures, go to Weather. And now I can look up all sorts of weather forecast information about Whitman Field. So I can look at the TAF here, but the TAF doesn't go all that far out, and there's a pretty big gap between each of the blocks in there. I can start to fill in some of those gaps, starting with the forecast discussion. Who used to use this on the old NOAA site when it was pretty well buried somewhere? Yeah. I think I had to relearn where it was every time I went to go do this. Well, we just put a button for it right there. Who's familiar with what this forecast discussion is? All right, a few people. So anytime that a forecaster makes a TAF, they basically write up a synopsis justifying their forecast. There's all sorts of great info in here about what that forecaster, that weather professional, thinks is going to be happening. There's an aviation section, and then there's also a short-term and a long-term forecast. So you can get information about, are there going to be storms rolling through the area? Is Sunday or Saturday going to be a better day for this flight? I can then move over to the MOS, which stands for Model Output Statistics, which is a lot like a TAF, but there isn't a forecaster who's gone through and taken that professional eye on it. It's just the computer output of what it thinks the forecast is going to be. But it goes out significantly further, and there are significantly more time blocks in it. So I think we were looking at this on Friday. Yeah, Friday, and I can go all the way out till Monday morning. Yeah, Monday morning in here in the forecast. So I've got several days of forecast thanks to the Moss. So if I was trying to come in last weekend, this would have been a much better way for me to look at those last couple of days. But if that's still not enough time, if I slide one more over there, I can look at the daily forecast. And this is actually a 10-day forecast that we've worked with the weather company to build. And it looks a lot like a civilian forecast, a civilian 10-day forecast, but there's all sorts of great aviation info in here, including this line along the bottom that will show me flight category along each of those days. So if I want to look at this real quick, I can say that the rest of Friday looks good, Saturday morning looks pretty good, and then it's going to go MVFR, and then Sunday about midday it's going to start looking better again. Well, if I look at about 6 p.m. here on Saturday, I can see that I've got a decent chance of rain, and it's going to go MVFR. So I want to make sure that we beat that in, have the airplane tied down, and ready to go by 6. So I don't want to be on the field any later than, say, 4. Another cool thing about that daily weather forecast is it's interpolated for any point on the globe. So if I've got a long route, and I've got a big space in between forecast areas, I can actually press and hold on the map and then tap on the WX button along the top up there and get that same daily weather forecast for any spot on the globe. So handy way to go through if I'm looking for a particular valley or something like that that doesn't have good weather forecasting in. So like I said, we want to be on the field no later than 4. Well, I go to tap that ETD button, and I've only got a time of departure. I don't know if that time of departure is going to get me in before I want to be on the field yet. Well, there's actually something I can do about that inside of ForeFlight. That Send To button at the bottom of the map, the flight plan drawer, will allow me to send this route to flights. And flights is one of the other tabs inside of ForeFlight where I can do flight planning. This is what we call a form-based planner. And most of our professional pilots that are working with dispatch agencies and they're going to go from point A to point B on a particular departure and arrival procedure, they like these a little bit more because they just need to have the info put in. They don't necessarily try and pick their way through VFR. Well, if I'm on one of the performance plans here, I have a little slider along the top that actually allows me to move from ETD up here over to ETA. And now when I tap the time over on the right, I can set when I want to be at my location. And then ForeFlight will fill back in when my departure time needs to be so that I arrive at that destination on time. So if you're ever having to do any flying where you really don't want to be late, handy tool. I've got a couple of other things right here on the Flights tab. Next to our departure and destination airports, I've got 2 buttons there that say Takeoff and Landing. If I tap on one of those, I can actually see all of the runways that are available for me at an airport and how the forecast, which I can see down here, there it is, see down here, how that forecast is going to impact my runways. So I know exactly what my winds, crosswind, headwind's going to be. I can select the best runway and start to fill in all the information about what my landing performance is going to be when I get to the airport. Anything along the right-hand side over here that's in blue, I can edit. So I can tap on, say, the runway usable length, and I believe there's a couple of airplanes parked over there that are going to prevent me from using the whole runway. I can edit that to a shorter length and still understand what my remaining time's going to be. What I like about having this in is at the very bottom, I have kind of what we used to calculate out of the POH every time. I've got my approach speed or my 50-foot speed, my total distance, and my ground roll. have that calculated for me automatically. If I'm going to go into an airport that's expecting me to land long or turn off on a particular taxiway as quickly as I can, knowing what my total distance and my ground rule is going to look like allows me to start planning where my aim point and my touchdown point need to be ahead of that turnoff, so I'm aiming right at the exact spot of the runway I want, touchdown, come to a stop, and turn off without having to do anything extra, and definitely not blowing past it because I aimed a little too close. Coming back onto the flights here, I can see that I've got a weight and balance in a fuel section here. Let's start on the fuel policy. I can tap on that where I see minimum fuel required right now, and I can choose between different fuel plans of how much fuel ForeFlight's going to think we have in the airplane. Basler does a pretty good job of getting fuel back in the planes, but it's just not something I want to worry about while we're on the field. I want to land with as much fuel as I can, take off, make it a good ways back home, and stop for fuel along the flight there. So I'm not going to go minimum fuel. I'm going to go over to our maximum fuel. And I can now see that I'm going to land with 40 gallons left in the airplane when I get here. That's pretty good. I'm burning about 12 or 13 gallons an hour right now. 40 gallons will get me pretty far back home, at least a couple hours south. But I don't want to come to Oshkosh by myself and not have any fun. I'm going to bring some camping gear, bring the buddy. Let's enjoy the air show. So right there in the weight and balance button, integrated into flights, I can go ahead and see that my aircraft profile has been set up. Who attended Rachel's fundamentals course earlier? Good. So we're going to do that again tomorrow afternoon. She'll walk you through entirely how to set up these weight and balance profiles for your airplane. The payoff of having that set up is now that I've got it, I can just tap on any of the stations and go ahead and put in a saved load or a standard person, start building out all of the cargo and stuff I have to bring with me, and I can see what that's going to do to my fuel tanks. So I've gone from full tanks down over to about 44 gallons. And when I go back to my flights tab, it's going to take that weight that I had in the air, or that amount of fuel that I have, feed it back in with my en route performance, and I can now see that instead of 40 gallons, I now only have 31. So being able to relate those back to each other, I've got a much better picture of how much fuel I'm going to burn. So if I go back to the map and bring up the ruler tool by tapping 2 fingers onto the map at the same time, I can actually see what my time and fuel burn is going to be. Well, if I had 40 gallons in the airplane, burning 26 to get down to St. Louis, yeah, that seems pretty reasonable. We'll still have reserve. I'm still feeling pretty comfortable with that. But if I only have 31 gallons in the airplane and I'm burning 26, we're getting a little bit closer to my comfort level, or a little further away from my comfort level for what we've got. So having that integration of weight and balance and flights together like that allows me to really start building up a picture when I'm making these kind of cross countries. All right, so that runs us through kind of our main scenario here of how to get in on the FISC, how I would make this trip in. But we wanted to give you guys a little bit more, little tips and tricks on how to use ForeFlight. So we went around the office and we asked everyone some of their favorite things that they use inside of the app. I want to give those to you now. A real popular, I bet this is probably the most popular one of anybody in the office, is in the settings. There is a setting called Current Location Marker, and it defaults to ForeFlight Airplane. But if you tap on that, you can actually change the little airplane icon that's flying along to quite a few things in here. So there's all sorts of fun stuff in here. If you keep scrolling down, one of the benefits of being a military customer of ForeFlight is that tends to get an icon made for whatever kind of airplane you're flying. So there's some fun ones down near the bottom in there. If I'm looking at an approach plate and I've got this ready to go, Let's say I'm night IFR. I've been en route, I've got all the cockpit lights turned way down, I've got my night vision right where I want it, and I hit the plates tab, and this white approach plate pops up on the screen, and there goes half an hour of me building up night vision. Well, in the top corner up there, on the plates tab, is a gear icon just like we looked at on the maps tab. If I bring that up, one of the options is to invert plate color. And that'll actually invert all the black and the white on the approach plate, so it's a little easier for me to see at night and it's not so blinding. One of the things that's awesome inside of ForeFlight, and this was a good hack a couple years ago from us, was the mountains, like the terrain and water, will actually stay the same colors. So instead of going from blue to orange like they would if you just inverted it normally, they will stay blue for lakes and stay orange or brown for mountains and terrain. So you still know what you're looking at as you're looking at the approach plate. We looked at the 3D route preview earlier, but there's another 3D feature inside of ForeFlight that allows us to look at an airport in 3D with traffic flying around it. It's a great way to get familiar with the airport as you're flying in the day. But in the lower right-hand corner, I have a day and night selector. And if I actually move over to night, I get a preview of what all of the runway, approach lighting, and even the PAPI and VASI look like at that airport. So if I'm planning on coming in on the approach, I want to know that when I break out, what's my sight picture going to be? Well, I can see that I've got the rail here, where my PAPI is, where my other cross runway is going to be looking, and what that looks like. So I know that, yep, that's the right runway, that's exactly where I need to be. If you ever fly in to a mountainous airport, and Aspen's pretty mountainous, you're usually going to want to know what your maximum terrain around you and maybe the airport elevation and min terrain is. So we actually have a button on the airports page next to the airport diagram that looks like a little mountain. And if you tap on that, we'll give you the max terrain, the min terrain, and the airport elevation in a 10-mile ring around that airport. So you have it right there, ready to go as an MSA or minimum altitude that you have as you fly in. Who here uses the distance rings as they fly around? Yeah, these are great. One thing that took me way too long to figure out was the little green triangles along there. That's your ground track. Easy to have lined up. I turn on my distance rings under the map settings that we looked at earlier in there. And it's great to have it in distance. But I really like to go ahead and tap on the little distance box in there. And so the one that says 4 nautical miles right now. And you have a whole selection of things that you want to use, including time as an option for those distance rings. So if you're doing a lot of flying into an uncontrolled airfield, I don't know what the approach speed is of every single airplane that might fly into the airport. So when somebody calls up and tells me that they're 10 nautical miles, I don't know if I've got 1 more lap or 2 more laps before they're going to be trying to join up. But if somebody tells me that they're 10 minutes from the airport as they're flying in, I know exactly where I'm going to be for them to join up on the downwind. So I can go ahead and extend or work them into the pattern as we're flying along. The instrument bar along the bottom of the maps page has a ton of great info, but maybe I don't care about ground speed or I don't care about track, and there's other information that I want to have on the screen. Well, I can tap on any of those instruments along the bottom and switch them to a whole variety of other info. Who here flies in the south? A couple people. It's been about 105 is the average temp back home for the last few weeks. Gets a little warm in the airplane. There's a new instrument in here called thermal state. I can actually keep an eye on if my iPad is getting too baked in the sun while we go fly and keep it from getting a little too hot on me. Very bottom of that list in there. Let's say I want to know what the elevation and terrain is at any point in the globe. Well, earlier we looked at just pressing and holding on the map as we went to go save a user waypoint. I don't know if anybody caught it, but right past that lat long is actually the AGL altitude. So my elevation altitude at any of those points. So if I'm trying to figure out, what's going to be along my route, I can just press and hold and understand what my terrain's going to be. I can take that another step. We looked at profile earlier, very handy tool. And we looked at the ruler, which is useful for understanding what my distances are. I can actually combine those two things at the same time. So if I have my ruler here, see if I get to play. I can press and hold onto the map, and then as I drag my ruler around, it'll actually show me the terrain, obstacles, and airspace underneath the middle of my ruler. So if I'm out flying west and I want to plan a diversion and see if I can get over to a particular airport without having to mess up my route, I can use the ruler tool and the profile view here and understand what my clearance is going to be at different altitudes before I decide and commit to an airport as a diversion. If I want to know specific information along that profile, I can just press and hold into the map. This might be the one I got to skip forward on. There we go. Press and hold into the profile view up there, and I can get a spot point. And it'll show me the exact clearance and altitude at that spot along the profile. And you'll notice that inside of the ruler tool, I get a little green dot telling me where that point is. Well, that works on the regular route and profile as well. So if I go and I've got my route in and I load up profile, and I can see that there's a mountain or a tower that I don't want anything to do with, I can press and hold into that profile, get close to it, and then see where it is on the map and rubber band my way around that obstacle or terrain. So that's what we've got for you today, but there is so much more to learn inside of ForeFlight. How do I keep proficient, and how do I learn about more stuff in? Inside of the app, right in that documents catalog that we looked at earlier, is the ForeFlight Pilot's Guide. This is the owner's manual, the POH for the app, built right into it. So I go to Documents, the ForeFlight catalog, and then I look for the Pilot's Guide over there. It gets updated every time we release a new version of the app. I recommend going to the very end of that document, and you'll actually see a change log that'll tell you what was new in each version of ForeFlight, and you can tap on that and get taken directly to the page in the guide explaining those new features. And we also have our foreflight.com/videos. I mentioned that all of these all of the presentations we were given in Oshkosh are being recorded. That's where they're going to be up after the show. So we'll have all of those recorded. If I do talk a little fast, you want to slow me down or rewind through anything, you can go through and see that on the video site. But we didn't want you to have to remember where all of this stuff is, so we went ahead and put it into the app. You go More, Support, and all of this information is available for you right here into that Supports tab. My favorite one is just to go ahead and tap on the Watch the Videos section there, and I can watch all of the latest YouTube videos that we have for free, available to walk me through exactly what the new feature is and how I take advantage of it. But if you go through any of that and you hit any kind of stumbling block, any confusion at all, remember that you've got team at ForeFlight, our pilot support team, 7 days a week, standing by on frequency. They really are your best resource as a user and as a pilot. Tell them what you want to do in the airplane. They'll get right back to you. I think our standard turnaround time is like 7 minutes or something like that on emails. It's amazing. So fantastic team ready to go for you. And that's what we've got today. So we've got a few minutes left for questions and answers. If you don't get a chance to have anything answered, Hangar C, come by, get a demo, come talk to us, come see the new Sentry. and enjoy the rest of the show. Sir in the hat there.
You talked about the temperature scale on the bottom here. Is that must be iPad only? It's not on my iPhone.
You got to have the instrument panel up in there. I can't see from here if you've got that on or not.
Bottom of the altitude, something like that?
Yeah. Swing by. Rachel or somebody here will go ahead and take a look at that, see if we can help out on there.
The variable altitude.
Yep.
Is there any way of doing top of descent or showing how to top of descent?
So in the per leg altitude in there, can I go ahead and show top of descent or top of climb in there? Not right now inside of that view. Inside of the regular navlog, there is a view for that. So the regular navlog does have that view in it. So yeah, that's where you can find that info. Yes, sir.
Use the descent where it tells you to descend. How do you enter that?
Looking for where to descend. I think that was probably the per leg altitude on there. Yeah. So inside of the profile view, you tap on one of the like the waypoint name box at the bottom in there. If you stick around after, we'll give you a demo of how to bring all that up.